Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the afternoon session. 2 speeds of value. And I think with it being the afternoon session, I'm going to need to wake everyone up a little bit. So I've included AI at least 5 times in this pack. So I'm Dean Oliver. I'm a director here at the FinOps Foundation. And part of my role is running working groups to produce a large number of the assets that you see daily that help you out with the practical examples. Now, between March and April 2026, one of those assets was around the intersection of FinOps and IT financial management. And it was a bit of a different asset. We worked with member vendors of the foundation to interview SME practitioners from a wide variety of organizations and industries on what they were doing right now on that intersection, what were the challenges they were facing, what were the key goals of each of the functions, what were their success stories and lessons learned, in order to form a practical, real-world lens of what is happening between those 2 teams. And this talk today leverages all of that research to give you a view of that across the key intersections, across the success factors, and very importantly, and on point, how AI is accelerating that and what you need to think about. Now, this talk is for organizations that have both an IT financial management function and a FinOps function, because some might not. So that is important to understand, and it will provide you with ideas, takeaways, and an understanding that you can then apply to the needs of your organization. It might not all apply directly, but it's definitely based on real-world learnings and success factors you can try out and mold to your needs. So, first of all, quick question. Raise a hand if you work in FinOps or have FinOps in your organization. Good, I was hoping quite a lot of people. What about IT financial management or an equivalent name function? Great, lots of you as well, so we've got the right audience. And how many of you in the room have reported different numbers for the same period without clarity on why those numbers are different? Good, okay, so we're going to have fun. So the research showed that when those types of challenges existed, the FinOps and the IT financial management function were often running in parallel. They had no join, no bridge, no connection, no accountabilities between the teams. They were independent. And some of this lies historically in the fact that they were built for different purposes and different speeds. Public cloud created a need for increased speed and granularity that traditional IT finance didn't cater for. It wasn't set up to cater for. FinOps, as you well know, informs engineering, product, leadership on value-based decisions. They provide insights for those decisions at the speed of consumption, near real time. ITFM govern technology estates long before cloud when they existed. Now, ITFM is not finance, and when present in the organizations interviewed, appeared differently in organizations. It might have been IT finance, it might be IT finance business partners, but there was many more variations, all doing collectively the same thing, maybe at different levels of maturity and with different add-ons, but the same core. TBM also sometimes appears, and it was often regularly used for the taxonomy, and it was vendor-aligned often to the tool that supported that taxonomy. Now, ITFM reports ledger-adjusted period close actuals, variance against set budgets, all aligned to the financial hierarchy, all aligned to accountancy standards, financial close periods, and operates at that speed to be accurate, to be precise. And both inform value-based decisions, but at different speeds, and often on different lexicon and terminology. Now, I'm just going to step back a little bit just to give some more context into what's happening. So, consumption-based pricing It's now no longer exclusive to public cloud, and it's been happening for a while, and it's accelerated very, very quickly with SaaS and AI particularly. And we're seeing from interviews on the state of FinOps from practitioners that this is happening. And this is why FinOps scopes and FinOps technology categories were put in place to help practitioners manage consumption-based spend across those other technology categories and to support them. SaaS platforms that once charged per seat, they're increasingly moving to hybrid seat and consumption-based pricing models. Some are even moving to outcome-based pricing models. It's a very, very different model to estimate on and to work between FinOps and IT financial management. Data cloud platforms such as Snowflake and Databricks, they bill on credits consumed, not on capacity reserved. And AI, it's adding a rapidly emerging complexity. So you've got AI costs that can appear simultaneously across cloud compute, SaaS contracts, enterprise agreements, on-premise infrastructure with GPU hardware installed in the same organization across different invoices, and it's dependent entirely on the architecture that's selected for that workload or that product. More about AI later, I promise. So the quote on screen, it captures what multiple practitioners have described. The boundary separating consumption-based technology from asset-based, it's collapsing. It's no longer there. It's getting very, very blurry and very, very hard to dissect. And this is causing FinOps and ITFM to think or rethink about how they need to intersect to be successful together. So from the interviews, we're seeing two patterns emerging. The first pattern is where organizations, they have a FinOps team, but that FinOps team is managing just public cloud spend at a granular level and sharing that consumption-based spend estimate, forecast, and budget to an extent with the IT financial management team. The second pattern is where the organization's FinOps teams are expanding into other technology categories due to leadership asks on managing that variable spend across SaaS, across data cloud platforms. And that's where the lines are getting a bit more blurry. And from the interviews, there was a lot of teams in the middle who were going through these friction points and these challenges on a journey with IT financial management to move from public cloud spend only to the other technology categories. So again, it's the same goal, the same stakeholders, but just a broader scope of spend for the outputs that both teams are still needing to provide for their independent goals to the organization. And the parallel operation, where existing, is creating confusion between the stakeholders, and it's causing the problem that I mentioned in the question up front, where it's eroding trust with leadership when they're reporting different numbers and there's no connect. So the issue that was commonly identified is intersection. It's not the capability of the teams. They've got brilliantly skilled people in each of the teams, but if that intersection's not in place, the working models between them are exposing different assumptions and different versions of the truth at different speeds. So on to the intersection points themselves. Again, there will be differences in how your organization operates and what might end up being the accountabilities between the different teams. So take this as common intersection points that through the research came up time and time again as success factors, but it might be different for your organization. And these organizations were managing it effectively, or this was the model that they were moving to. And each had a defined ownership, a clear handoff process, and a minimum set of shared data to make that join and make that bridge successful. So the first one, savings recognition. There's a big success factor with FinOps on optimization and cost saves. Yes, FinOps is all about value, but I know a number of you see where the leadership focuses, and they do also focus on cost saves. FinOps identifies savings, not budget reductions in the top-down financial hierarchy, at cost center level, or however the financial hierarchy is organized. So the reported savings must enter the IT financial management cost base, and finance needs to formally recognize the budget impact and categorize the savings before the optimization reporting begins. So there's a clear handoff and a clear connect on what's going on with the savings, how they're being accounted for, and how they're being tracked. FinOps quantifies, ITFM validates, and finance confirms. And weak governance causes duplication, and it certainly causes lost savings. So, as one practitioner put it, both functions, they might claim authority over savings reported, and without clear ownership, without clear roles and ownership, it becomes contested and it's rarely resolved. Shared vocabulary is important and it's needed to classify and validate and recognize those savings. So that's intersection 1. 2, chargeback and showback design. FinOps designs the attribution logic, especially for bottom-up consumption cost. And ITFM executes the overall IT financial chargeback with the accountancy standards. Showback needs accurate attribution data, and chargeback requires ledger reconciliation. And the ownership, it must be synchronized up front. You need that level of synchronization because of the different speeds, so you're not creating friction between the two teams. So FinOps, as one practitioner put it, owns the data and the logic behind the chargeback. ITFM owns the formal chargeback process, and clear accountability presents overlap and confusion. Again, these are worked examples from organizations who have put this RACI model effectively in place. It might not be for your organization, but this has worked for many. The next one, budget and forecast alignment. FinOps provides consumption-based forecasts, working with product and engineering on different forecasting methodologies to make sure that forecast can be as accurate as possible in consumption-based volatile spend. And trust me, AI spend is a lot more volatile than public cloud ever was. ITFM converts this into often aggregated budget commitments aligned to that financial hierarchy. And operating rhythms and consumption volatility will create forecast friction. So agreed pre-close handoffs, they'll reduce surprises, particularly for IT finance and particularly for finance when those numbers are flowing through. So having that intersection in place makes sure that you're both speaking the same numbers and the same language and can defend what's happening there. So again, another quote from the interviews. A practitioner said that FinOps takes the real-time consumption view and it helps define and validate what the future budget will look like with IT finance. Some even provide 2 different flavors of what that forecast could be, just to make sure they're clear on what the best and the worst case scenarios are. And that was one of the more mature levels of the integration between the teams. Variance decomposition. Budget and forecast alignment, it's a big prerequisite for this one, obviously. If finance asks what changed and why, and I'm sure of you a lot have had that question, or ITFM certainly has, FinOps explains the workload level variance drivers. They're good at that data. They understand the variance drivers. ITFM translates the variance into ledger terms on the financial hierarchy. And having a shared decomposition presents competing narratives between the teams. You're operating again off that same consistent joined flow. And it protects the trust with the leadership. You're both successful at delivering what you're supposed to be delivering to the business, to the product leaders, and for the outcomes. So, again, on the quote, variance must separate price movement from volume movement. FinOps needs to explain the story behind the numbers, and without that context, finance, engineering, product, leadership cannot act. Sorry about that. The final one, terminology and tagging alignment. One of the most important things between the teams, and it's certainly not the last and least intersection, it's one of the biggest. Shared terminology enables every downstream interaction. Misaligned tags are critical They make the data joins between teams, and if they're not there, they create reconciliation barriers. Agree standards between the teams before any reporting and allocation happens, especially if you're bringing in new costs like AI into the cost base. Enforce tagging at deployment controls. This is one of the most mature things that teams are starting to do, and where they're starting to put pre-deployment controls in place for tagging and automate that tagging as a requirement before resources and workloads are put live. It's treating it as access control. Misaligned terminology creates conflicting interpretation as cost, as one practitioner put it. The teams would pick and choose logic instead of automating the subjectivity and risk for error out of it. So we come to the data, the backbone, the spine of that intersection, and 7 minimal viable data join keys, that was quite a mouthful, I'm glad I said that right, were consistently identified in all interviews. So data points such as cost center, the service or product, the environment were discussed, and the importance of those data points to create one shared view of technology spend between the teams, even when they're operating at different speeds. Imagine it like a Rubik's Cube, where they're deconstructing that data, that financial data, to report to different lines, to different stakeholders. But with this data set, they're able to keep and reconstruct that data in a way they both understand, and connect financial records then to the operational reality, and enable a consistent reporting and consistent roll-up to that financial hierarchy. And it reduces the reconciliation effort, the manual headaches and overheads that you've probably all had, and the ownership disputes between the teams, because things have been communicated. Collaborate. That is the first principle of FinOps. So we move to focus. Focus standardizes cost and usage language. And we're seeing from quite a lot of FinOps and ITFM teams that even when not fully adopting focus or just starting out, they're using the focus specification just as a terminology base to operate on across the organization. They're training up finance, ITFM, and FinOps on focus data specification just for terminology, so they're all speaking the same language. And it supports, when using focus, in standardizing common data columns and definitions between the functions, and helps different systems map to common fields. One of the biggest headaches when you really get to the nuts and bolts. The vendor schemas, they require less translation. The ITFM models receive cleaner consumption data that they can understand. And the shared terminology is providing that strength, not just to FinOps and ITFM, but the confidence to the leadership, the product owners, and even the engineering teams, that everyone's talking on that same language. So 4 common success factors were observed from the interviews on those integration points when teams are operating effectively, or what teams seen as their North Star. Every intersection between the teams is discussed, understood, and mapped to create a permanent bridge. That's really important. The roles and responsibilities at each intersection are clearly defined. It doesn't necessarily sound hard, but it requires the functional leaders and the leadership top-down to connect and make sure that those agreements are in place to reduce any friction between the teams, and make sure it's clear that one's not trying to replace the other. They're both doing different jobs, as we got to before, but if you don't have that in place, then you don't have a model to work off. Accountability for the process activities, the systems of record data, and the reporting types are agreed as well. Who owns what type of data? Who owns reporting to which stakeholder? What speeds are happening? All of those things form a basis to agree. And the minimal viable data join keys are in place as that maturity grows, and the tagging enforcement is in place as maturity grows further. And the clear pre-close handoffs are then in place to explain the variance earlier. You're just sequencing what's happening between the teams across your service catalogs and across your outputs to all of the different stakeholders. And if you go back to the model I showed on the screen, where those stakeholders intersect and you're reporting to potentially the same ones. Then, new cost categories. This is the new one, and it's more mature. and something that organizations have started to do. But new cost categories are established at contract time with attribution jointly agreed. This is so important for AI right now because it's a new cost category, and we're going to come to that now. But before, the majority of that original conceptual model, it doesn't change. It stays the same. But if you look at the bottom of that model, the intersection does. It becomes a clear bi-directional bridge. It enables consistent, aligned flow of data and insights through to the personas at the speeds, and there's a clear understanding between the teams. Nothing's changing necessarily on the goals and the capabilities and the services they offer. That intersection is what's changing and removes the friction. But I promised I'd get to AI, and I am. So AI, the rapidly emerging complexity of that spend, which you'll have heard in the keynote this morning, you've likely attended some talks on this today. AI value and token economics is about to stress test each one of those intersection points, even if you're sitting there thinking they're all in place now. AI spans multiple technology categories. Cloud GPU costs need tagging discipline. SaaS-based AI consumption, it hides inside SaaS bills. Data cloud platform AI uses virtual currency, but there's AI sitting there. And agentic agent use in model providers might need separately categorizing from human queries. The bottom line, the growth of AI spend is happening now, and it needs that joint governance and that joint intersection more than ever. So as an example, and we've used this diagram again with different inputs, FinOps can track token consumption by workflow. And when the maturity is there and when things start to standardize, they can start to link usage to business outcomes and engineering actions and support decision-making, like public cloud, at the point of consumption. FinOps can explain any consumption volatility early or have shift left in place with FinOps at deployment, FinOps at runtime controls that you're seeing in order to automate some of those controls on the costs, and provide pre-clause for variance narrative alignment to IT finance. IT financial management can have the right data to determine CapEx, OpEx, special financial treatments, for example, on R&D type spend, with the data at the right time, and execute the chargebacks with transparency of AI spend, not as a line item on the IT budget, but as the transparency of AI spend to the product or the service, to the P&L. And it supports outcome-based insights on what decision to make next, both on the FinOps team at real time or pre-budget-based decisions on application, architecture, and workload type placement, or from IT finance on the speed of value they operate on for some of the leadership decisions around which bets to make and which bets to call off once the costs are there. So two speeds of value again, and supporting the organization with decisions and trade-offs using the skills that each of the functions has. AI costs need to be classified early. They're designed into the contract and the deployment and the runtime itself. And AI is shifting spend categories, and emerging success factors have AI costs as part of product economics. As I said, they're not a line item on the IT budget if you're at a level of maturity where you're trying to drive AI value. And the boards need defensible AI ROI right now, and that certainly isn't a line item. So on the quotes again, as one practitioner put it, AI cost visibility must be designed at contract stage. Token license usage costs need separation early, and clean data flow turns analysis from months to days. So it really helps with the workload there. So complementary mandates, not competing. FinOps, it brings real-time cost intelligence. ITFM brings finance-grade governance and accountancy standards. Both support business value at different speeds. And when they both exist, only together can they create one trusted view and make sure that they're supporting the business in a technology disruption cycle that is rapidly happening right now. This is a link to the full paper, if anyone would like to read through that, and that goes into a lot more of the detail on the research itself. But if anyone would like to ask any questions, we've got plenty of time to go through any questions that you might have to me now. And my kind friend, Savina, who's an ambassador for the UK, is going to help me out, because I usually MC this room, but I'm speaking. Would anyone like to ask any questions?
Thank you. So going back to the personas that can lead that bridge between the two, right, disciplines, why product? Because product today, in our company at least, is overwhelmed already. They're not going to be able to do what you're saying that they should do, which is critical to be able to survive even, but they're not going to be able to do.
That might have been a misinterpretation of that chart. That was showing the flow of information to the stakeholders, not the organizational hierarchy. So if I click back for you, there we go. Typically, the ITFM function reports into the CFO from the data, and a smaller majority had reporting lines into the CIO or operated in a hybrid structure. FinOps, for the most part, reported into the CTO, CIO, but a smaller proportion reported elsewhere. What we've seen in the executive interviews that had been performed by the FinOps Foundation is that there was an emerging coup for the CTO, and there was convergence happening within FinOps, ITFM, ITAM, and SAM, so that they were operating under the same overarching leader and leveraging the specialist skills that come within those disciplines in order to report, in order to drive against the same outcome of value and not be separated with differential leadership narratives. And that will support things like the underpinning of the data backbone and who owns systems of record and the flow of data. And that was something that's been emerging in a number of the FTSE 100 and Fortune 100 organizations, where they are actually starting to reconstruct that ownership around those disciplines and functions.
That helps. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I can ask a question then. I think one of the last slides was about the two disciplines being, well, the one before.
Oh, yeah.
Working together, no, complementing each other.
Yeah.
Are there any best practices from the interviews on how do we actually go to the same numbers? Because from my experience, there could be like even more than two different like sets of numbers, like one coming from FinOps, one coming from finance, one coming from procurement, one coming from like business management.
Yeah.
So it could be like all over the place. What were like good practices or anything that you might have seen that people could use when they go back on Monday?
Yeah. So in terms of the good practice around the data, it's agreeing the ownership around the system of records and the flow of data through the system of records. So you're totally right in terms of it's not just a FinOps and IT financial management problem, it's full translation through the journey right the way to finance as well, and making sure that where you've got the invoices and the cost and usage data streaming live into the various cost platforms from public cloud or other technology vendors now, and you've got the data coming up into the general ledger, that there is a join, which was the join keys between that data and an understanding of who owns the system of record and how that data is joining together. There might be discrepancies that are noted due to the time that the data is coming through in real time from the cloud billing data, for example, versus what comes in from the invoice. But the reconciliation period and using those data join keys is what will support in making sure that the narratives stay the same and they understand how they've done that and the cost and the data points that that's been done on, which is where focus as an example again comes into it for a shared understanding of each of the different columns that might sit within those calculations. Yes?
So from the working group, like that was really But we also saw, like, for the, what can you do when you go back on Monday?
Yeah.
The conversation between the two groups, and that some of the organizations we looked at had regular weekly or monthly meetings between the two groups, and they reviewed the numbers together before they published them out, and they could, if they were different, they could explain the differences, and like just building the relationship and having those conversations.
Yes, Nan, you're exactly right. So Nan was one of the key people who supported with the interviews. That is exactly right in terms of the meetings and the cadence between the teams, so that they're not sitting in governance meetings separately. They're not sending out reports before the other has seen them or they've aligned on that, and making sure that that cycle is in place, which I did touch on during the forecasting and the variance intersection. But that's a very good point, Nan. Thank you.
Yeah, more of a comment, actually. So Will Hutchins with Starbucks. The way we solved this is the ITFM department actually received our reports, and exactly what you said, we had to cut a totally different set of reports based only on invoices, because the financial periods are being 28 days and our cloud invoices being 30 days. We had to give them something that they could concretely say, this aligns to the ledger and it's how our billing works. So that's how we got the numbers to match. So we sort of have the real time, what's happening this week with the engineering teams, but then the finance teams get a totally different end of period, whatever, month, quarter, AFP, that kind of stuff. So that's how we solved it at Starbucks.
Yeah. Brilliant. We've got time for one or two more questions if there's any. Otherwise, we will.
I'll just add a comment to that. In my previous role, one thing that we have seen, which was actually an issue, was especially invoicing data. So particularly if you use a marketplace, very often that data is coming 2 months later, because you get your cloud bill with the marketplace in one place, but then the actual third party that you have bought via the marketplace, that's coming a month later. So there's quite often the discrepancy on that, and it does cause issues. So it's one thing to watch out.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So one of the ways we did that at Starbucks is that we have capital financial rules that basically say we can't do internal transfers of below a certain number. Yep. So we set criteria about marketplace purchases as we started peeling away marketplace purchases from our typical Ariba PO scenarios. We had this kind of scenario, and what ended up happening is the FinOps team became a clearinghouse for every one of those transactions, and essentially we have a working database essentially of every financial transaction, which bill to RC it was supposed to go to. We have to do all the reclasses at the end of the month for our finance department, so we're sort of got a foot in finance, so that was one of the ways we were able to solve that. The other way you can do it is for marketplace purchases that are more subscriptions based, is you actually try to get the product teams to purchase the marketplace purchase within their subscription, so that the flow through of allocation actually already aligns with them, and we didn't have to do anything but just show that that was a one marketplace and that one cost center. So that's some of the ways that we solve both of those problems.
That's a fascinating lesson learned. Thank you for sharing that.
Anyone else?
Okay, well, thank you very much again, everyone, for attending, and enjoy your evening.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thanks for watching. Check out the rest of our channel for more FinOps content. Like, subscribe, and leave questions and comments for our speakers. We appreciate your support.